I'm speaking with Paul Jacob of Liberty Initiative Fund, and I'm Scott Tillman, the National Field Director with U.S. Term Limits, and talk about direct democracy and what you do at Liberty Initiative Fund, because what we're getting into now is elected representation, and there was a reason many years ago for elected representation, and there's still a reason today for elected representation as opposed to having us vote on every single issue. But you have some very hands-on experience with direct democracy and actually advising countries and different groups around the world on direct democracy. And I'd like to talk about that a little bit today, and your experience, especially the Taiwan thing, but beyond that too, because you've gone to South America and Europe also.
Well, and what these conferences, these global forums are all about is people sharing what they're doing in different places and what's working and what's not. And it's somewhat funny in that the problems are oftentimes, the same. You think if people come to these events and it's like, in my country, they're cheating us out of all these different, rights that we have. And oftentimes they'll say, I know in the United States it's not like that. And of course it is. We're running into the same problems. I was on a panel discussion with a gentleman from the Netherlands where they had a process and the national legislature basically voted to abolish the process that would allow citizens to do things directly because lo and behold, they didn't like what the citizens did. And we run into that same problem. I mean, on the ballot in North Dakota in 2020 is going to be a measure that says that after the citizens vote on a constitutional amendment, it goes back to the legislature for the legislature to decide whether they're going to let it stand or whether they're going to make the people vote again. And it's not so terrible to have a two votes. I don't particularly like that system. It seems like you reward the powerful interests, and grassroots groups now have to win an election twice and raise money against, powerful forces and stuff. But okay, that's a fair enough system. The problem is here, the whole idea is that the legislature ought to make the final say, ought to be like a cop on the people, as if the people might be illegitimate. Well, all those legislators were elected by the people. That's the only,
right.
The only legitimacy they have is that they were elected by the people. And when the people vote directly on issues, those votes ought to count. They are the boss. And it doesn't mean I'm not a pro-democrat, pro-democracy person who says democracy always gets it right. It doesn't. The people are wrong sometimes. And if they vote to do things that violate people's fundamental human rights, I don't care it could be 99 to 1. That's not right. So no. I believe in human rights, individual rights. And the truth is almost everybody who talks about democracy around the world, whether it's in Hong Kong or it's somewhere in Africa or in South America or Europe or the United States, none of them are talking about voting on everything willy-nilly to where if everyone voted that, we need to steal Scott Tillman's coat and take Paul Jacob's shoes, that's a legitimate thing to do, or, tell people what they can, what God they can worship or who they can marry or what have you. So, these sorts of ideas behind democracy are universal. And it's not that there's not a nut somewhere, but for the most part, people believe that human rights, individual rights go hand in hand with democracy as a way to protect those rights against government's powerful monopoly on physical force.
Yeah, one of the most common ways we see the initiative and referendum and the direct democracy process used here in the United States is to actually limit government. It's one of the few ways that people have to especially limit their legislators. And that's how term limits passed in every place that it has passed and stuck, was through the initiative and referendum process. Save Louisiana, excuse me, let me step that back, because the FBI came in and there was a lot of writing on the wall, and the people of Louisiana were going to do something, and the legislature decided to step up and give the people the option on that. But that's the only...
It's the weakest term limits in the country. without a doubt, because you can serve 12 years in one house, then move to the other, then move to the other. You can basically serve the rest of your life. But it was incredible that they were able to do that through the legislature. And it not only took the FBI doing a sting where they got all kinds of people taking payoffs on the floor of the legislature, and had the video, thank goodness. But it also was a tremendous lobbying effort where groups that were very conservative groups, more liberal groups, got together and worked together to lobby very, very aggressively. So even with the FBI, arresting a bunch of people for corruption, it also took that citizens getting organized and doing something about it. But it is kind of the exception that proves the rule. One, it's the weakest term limit in the entire country. But the other thing is, it's the kind of thing where every other place has had to have the initiative and referendum process. And that's, I think term limits is one of the best issues for people to see. You just couldn't do it. The politicians are not going to let you reform them without having a direct process where you can do it without their blessing.
And this is one of those issues where the initiative and referendum shows a clear difference. I mean, in states with and without, where you get things like term limits, you get tax expenditure limitations that you don't have in other places. But with term limits, Democratic voters, Republican voters, conservative voters, progressive voters, people who have all those, they all come down on the same side of this issue. Yet it's like pulling teeth to get legislators to support it, even though 80+% of their constituents want it. Cross-party lines, people want it. You would think it's a layup, but it is pulling teeth. And we can see there are certain examples like this of putting a limit on the power of politicians, putting a limit on, the authority of the individuals in government, that there's real pushback from the political class that makes it necessary to have some sort of direct democracy option.
Yes. It's and it seems like it's not that we elect terrible people, but we put them into a system in which they immediately are kind of told, here's how you can stay here forever, be a career politician. It's a cushy job. And part of that is to play ball with all the special interests and to basically turn the government into, they talk about constituent services. Well, the service that representatives are supposed to provide is representing what the people want. But instead, as we've discussed, they turn that into I'm now the government's marketer back to you. I will help you and your mother get her Social Security check, or, I'll do this to help your kid get into the Naval Academy, or I'll do this favor or that favor to help you through the bureaucracy in Washington that these politicians have created, and then you kind of owe me. And
there's a case, a friend of mine, they were getting ready to go to Dominican Republic, and one gentleman realized that he had not renewed his passport and it was expired. And the whole story became how great it was that he knew somebody who knew the congressman who could get that processed earlier, rather than how come Congress is letting a system where it takes, months or several weeks to get your passport back. How come that's the norm? They're selling it back to you.
Well, and that's what's funny is that reminds me of the stories you used to hear in the 70s, to date myself, about the Soviet Union, where, everything was who you knew, and that you needed somebody, high up in the bureaucracy to approve something for you to do anything. And it seems like our society has become more that way, where, it's not what you know, it's who you know.
Well, some animals are more equal than others, Paul.
Right. Oh, that's true. It's it seems to me there's a very fundamental connection between, the whole idea behind representative government. Some people have this attitude that somehow it was that we didn't want people having too much say-so. So we wanted to create this several step process and get them to elect other people who maybe would be, more brilliant and successful and so on. And those would be our representatives because the masses somehow were not smart enough to vote directly. That's not my view of democracy and representative government. And my view is we have representative government because the rest of us are busy. We've got lives, we got, families and work and other things that we got to do. We can't all do politics all the time. And that legislative bodies, representative bodies, are a time-saving device. We instead of all of us going to the Capitol, we elect one guy to go for us. And the key is that that person be representative. And the idea of direct democracy is that there are times when, hey, let's not do it through somebody else. We need to represent ourselves. And if you don't believe in direct democracy where voters can represent themselves, then it seems to me you don't really believe in representation. You believe in having people called representatives, but the whole idea is somehow to block representation, to not get 100% representation, but something less because you don't want 100% representation. And I think we do want that. And I think the crisis, I work with direct democracy in the US, and as we've talked about, we go to these things and work with people all over the world who are running into the same problems. But there's constantly these attacks on direct democracy. Every election, whoever didn't win the vote says we got to get rid of, this democratic check on our power because we don't like how the vote came out. And it seems to me that impulse is all about getting rid of the one system that's working. The real problem is in representative democracy, not direct democracy. I think, and we've polled in every state in this country, the support for initiative and referendum is at the lowest 2-1 in favor. In some states, it's actually 7-1 in favor. So it's off the charts that people like direct democracy. And then you poll on what's the approval rating of Congress. Well, it's like barely double digits. It's 13% or 17%, and you wonder who are these 13% or 17% right, who actually think Congress is doing a good job. But that's where the crisis is, and because I don't think you can run a government on direct democracy, voting. People, again, we don't want to have to run the government every day. We've got other things to do. We really need representative democracy to work. And to me, the first issue ought to be term limits, because it is the issue that every demographic group, and when I say every demographic group, I don't know that you could find you'd have to go through all kinds of contortions to find a demographic group anywhere. Maybe, bald people over 100 who are, billionaires or something. Maybe they're at 49, 51, or something. Who knows? But it's like every group likes this. It doesn't matter political party, doesn't matter gender, doesn't matter race, doesn't matter part of the country. Term limits won in New York City and San Francisco. They also won big in Wyoming and in Nebraska and in Middle America, South, North. This is what the people want. And if we can't get it, it says something about how far gone our country is. This is right. It is the word of the century maybe is existential. It's an existential threat. It actually is not a threat. It's an existential reality that we're not going to make it if we can't have enough citizen control of our government, that we can't say, look, you only get to serve for so long. If the politicians can stiff arm us and say, no, we'll serve as long as we want. We don't really care what the people think. If that's how representative government works, we're in deep, deep trouble. And that's why it's, this is an issue that it hasn't always been on the front burner in Washington, but it has been on the front burner of so many people I know who are thinking about the country. How do you get the country and the government to function in some way that allows us to continue to be prosperous and free. And those people talk term limits all the time.